Hi guys, welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. So first of all, I have a quick little announcement to make for those who are interested in coaching, group coaching, etc., because I get a lot of inquiries about that. And that is that I am officially launching a group coaching program called From Quasi to Full Recovery. This is a 2-month group coaching program aimed for people who are in recovery and they're finding themselves a bit stuck in that quasi state. So this is not a program for people who are in the very, very, very earliest stages of recovery, but more so someone who's maybe done some work already or find themselves still a bit stuck and just want to go that extra mile towards full recovery. I wanted to create something that was a bit more affordable compared to a lot of other group coaching programs that are in the market, not to mention a bit more affordable than the one-on-one coaching, and also something that allows me to take in more people at the same time, right? Because my wait list is a little bit too high for me to keep up on it right now, and I'm very, very sorry for those of you who've been waiting for quite a while. I wanted to keep that short. I will create a bonus episode where I talk a bit more in depth about this coaching program for those who are interested, but also for those who are maybe not interested, so they don't have to sit here and listen through me talking so much about the program, because that may be a bit boring. Rather get straight to the topic. But I do want to say, if you are interested in the group coaching program, you can secure your spot now at letsrecover.co.uk. There you can also read more about the program, what it is, more in-depth about what it covers, because I've essentially put out the entire schedule already, and just overall what you get, what you can expect. And also, if you got any questions about the group coaching program and if it's for you, you can also drop me an email at contact@letsrecover.co.uk. That email is also on my website, letsrecover.co.uk. So check out the up-and-coming bonus episode where I discuss this program in detail if you're interested, and if you're not interested, ignore this and keep listening, and let's get into the topic for today. So today I wanted to talk about binging and binge eating. What is it? Why does it happen? What are some common misconceptions people and also just society have about binging? What are some common pitfalls people who binge experience, and how does this lead to more binging rather than less? Those who have listened to this podcast for some time know that I talk about binging and all its forms a lot. I have made so many episodes where I talk more specifically about binging. So I have episodes where I talk about extreme hunger. I have episodes where I talk about breaking the binge restrict cycle. I also have episodes where I discuss, the fear of developing binge eating disorder, the fear of emotional eating, etc., etc. So this will be a bit more of a general episode covering binging and just umbrella term of binging, maybe for people who aren't that familiar with the specific terms such as reactive hunger, extreme hunger, etc., etc. This may also be a 2-part series, but it could equally have been a 10-part, 20-part, 100-part series, because I find this topic so fascinating and I feel like we all kind of got it wrong. And I will also make a lot of future episodes covering binging, or just the whole topic of consuming a lot of food in a short period of time in general. So to get started, binging is my topic, my niche interest topic when it comes to recovery issues, right? I feel like a lot of us who work in the field of research eating disorders, we have like a few topics close to our hearts that we are very, very extra interested in, pay a bit of extra time and attention to. For me, that one is binging 100%. Part of that is because it was something I struggled with myself. So I had anorexia nervosa, binge purge subtype, right? So I was just in a messy cycle of anorexia, bulimia, orthorexia, binging, purging, restriction. It was everything, everywhere, all at once. And this takes me to a very common misconception about just eating disorders in general, and that is that it is always one specific behavior. Of course, that's the case sometimes, but very often I see people tend to fluctuate between different behaviors. And what is the difference between anorexia nervosa, binge purge subtype versus bulimia is a very good question. I think that a lot of it actually, and this is so silly, I am by no means an advocate for this part, but I think down to the diagnostic criteria, a lot of it comes down to your BMI, which is, I don't get me started on that. Then again, it may also relate a bit more to the fact that anorexia, binge purge subtype with a restriction may be a bit of more of a central component compared to bulimia. But then again, I see a lot of people with bulimia who are restrictive a lot of the time as well, right? So anyways, that is a topic for another day. So essentially, I was very much in a cycle of binging and compensatory behaviors in return, right? And also when I started recovery, I experienced extreme hunger, which was also very, very scary and also very, very life-saving. So that's one reason why I love the topic of binging. Another reason why I really love it is because there is so much science behind it, right? I like things where I can find out through science what is going on. What does the study say, right? And when it comes to binging, there's actually is biological components, which I just like it. And I think this is one of my frustrations sometimes with psychology. So much of it we don't quite know. It's kind of like theories and guesses, but with binging there is a lot of hard science, which I love it. Please don't get me wrong, there are still a lot of disagreements within the field about what is actually going on, but I think a lot of these so-called disagreements are actually just misunderstandings and lack of understanding, to be completely honest. So yeah, that's a little bit of a background why I'm so interested in binging. The second thing I want to touch upon is the word binging, right? Because this is one thing I see very, very often, and this is a controversial one, right? I often hear things in recovery spaces where people say things like binging in recovery isn't really binging, extreme hunger is not binging, these two are separate. And overall, I think it comes down to the fact that binging has it's a negatively loaded word, right? And I completely understand that. And that if you call extreme hunger binging, it may pathologize it. Also, for those who listen and wonder, okay, extreme hunger, what is that? Extreme hunger essentially refers to the very, very common sharp rise in mental and physical hunger that people who are recovering from eating disorders experience. I made an episode covering that, so check that out. So it's a lot of focus on that. Extreme hunger isn't binging. This isn't binging. It isn't binging when it happens after restriction, blah, blah, blah. And I completely understand that. Then again, what I tend to see is that when it comes to binging, just per definition, eating a lot of food in a short period of time, often with feelings of shame or guilt or whatsoever, I see that restriction is usually a component, right? And I used to be very much someone who would separate between, binging in someone recovered from anorexia versus just binging for someone else. But I find that this someone else person, even if they don't have anorexia, where there is binging, there often is restriction anyways. In terms of why I use the word binging, I literally just use that word because it's simple, because people know what it means, right? There's no deep message. I don't pathologize binging or say that it's a bad thing when I use that word. I just find that it fits the definition, right? So when I talk about binging, don't think that I'm talking about a bad, scary behavior that people must avoid in recovery. I'm literally just using different terms interchangeably. Sometimes I'll call it binging, then extreme hunger, then reactive hunger. There is not necessarily any negatively loaded message from my end, but if you prefer to call it something else, then I completely support that. So yeah, back to binging. Essentially, I just use binging as a term to refer to eating a large amount of food, large quantity of food in a short period of time, often, but not always, but very often there tends to be some feelings of shame or guilt afterwards or during, and some form of secrecy. And when I say eating a large amount of food in a short period of time, I don't necessarily refer to having an extra slice of cake, right? We often refer to more drastic intakes, even though binging can, for some people, it can be a very subjective experience, right? Some people may feel like it is binging when they have an extra slice of cake, right? But that's not necessarily the case. Then again, you could also argue that it has to do with how you eat that cake, right? If you're eating that cake in a short period of time, filled with guilt, shame, secrecy, could that count as binging? I mean, I probably would say that the quantity part would rule it out, but that is, again, for another episode. What is binging, what is not? Overall, I won't focus too much on the logistics or the specifics here. I said that as I literally just went into the logistics and specifics. But anyways, I'm going to go straight into the most common misconception people have about binge eating, right? Most common misconception people have about binge eating is that it is a lack of control, greed, and that it's always just an emotional response, that it always is about fulfilling negative emotions, blah, blah, blah. And don't get me wrong, I understand the concept of binge eating and people turn to it when they are, emotionally dysregulated, right? When you're very sad, turning to it, right? But I find it very strange that we never ask the question, why does that hit the spot, right? Why does binging fulfill that? And here is where something important comes in, right? If you are someone who finds it emotionally rewarding or emotionally activating by stuffing yourself to the point of discomfort, then there is a high chance that you are actually undernourished. Because a person who's fully nourished eats whatever they want, whenever they want, allow themselves access to all kinds of foods, they would not experience pleasure or a reward or a high from stuffing themselves with food that way. When you are emotionally, activated or upset, or maybe emotionally deactivated, just sad and wanting to feel something, you will tend to turn to behavior that give you that kind of activation, right? And because that's the case, I think a lot of people just dismiss binging as, oh, well, that shows that it's not about the food, right? But then again, why do nobody questions why the binging is rewarding, right? And I think this comes down to diet culture, right? Where it has become more normalized to be a bit restrictive and a little bit chronically dieting. And that will make that behavior rewarding. And I also know for some people who listen to this, they're going to be like, no, everyone would find that behavior rewarding. No, they would not. I know that can be so difficult to understand when you are in the depths of it. Because you just assume this is how everyone else feels, but they just have better self-control than me. Even though you didn't feel this way before, right? Have you felt this way your whole life? I mean, to be honest, yeah, there are some people who may have, especially if you've been put on a diet or had strong rules or messaging about good or bad foods from a young age, you may have felt that way your whole life, right? But equally, there are a lot of people who haven't, right? A lot of people who were very much able to have functional hunger fullness cues in the past, and now they don't. And that happened during or after a period of restriction, right? For example, one of my clients, and I'm sharing this with client permission, someone they knew of had late stage cancer and was essentially dying. And it was interesting because the thing that was in my client's head then was, why don't they just eat everything in sight? They're going to die anyways. Why aren't they just on a binge feast? And just understanding that when you are not severely undernourished, I mean, to be fair, in the case of terminal illness, someone can be undernourished without having extreme hunger. But anyways, understanding that when you're not undernourished, actually consuming the entire cupboard with food is not necessarily at the forefront of your mind, that can be very difficult to comprehend when you are not renourished yourself, right? And I see this all the time where, for example, a celebrity will come out and talk about their problems with binge eating and I'm an emotional eater, I'm a food addict, and then it is pretty much always you can trace back that there are still or has been elements of restriction, right? It all started with that restriction that gave them physical and mental qualms about giving in to their hunger and eating certain foods. And I think this is a key thing that we are missing when we talk about binging. We talk about the binging as the core problem rather than a symptom of something else. And if we are talking about the binging as a symptom of something else, it often goes straight into childhood and psychology. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these things can't at all affect food and eating patterns, right? I would say that if you're someone who, let's say you're going through something difficult, then that can maybe make you really dislike yourself, which then can make you engage in restrictive behaviors, which then can trigger the binging, right? Then again, because binging feels so emotionally rewarding, it is assumed that it is an addiction in the same way as we talk about alcoholism and drugs, right? And equally, what is the solution if someone is an alcoholic, right? There's pretty much a lot of agreement within the field that if someone is an alcoholic, they have to stop drinking. They can't access alcohol, right? They're going to have to stay away from alcohol for the rest of their lives, right? That is kind of in agreement, even though I know some people will debate against that as well. Anyways, that is a very commonly accepted thing. If you're an alcoholic, you can't drink. And people take this approach to binging and then think, oh yeah, if you're a binge eater, you need to restrain yourself from certain foods. You need to throw certain foods out of your house, right? You can't be around these foods. Because again, food is your drug. But the thing is that if you give an alcoholic unlimited access to alcohol for a prolonged period of time and tell them you can just drink how much you want, that is going to go very badly. They're not going to just wake up one day and be like, well, I'm satisfied now, right? Then again, with binging, what I have seen over and over when I work with people who are binging, if they allow themselves unrestricted access to the food, especially the foods that they've been banning themselves from, over a prolonged period of time, combined with cutting all restrictive compensatory behaviors, the binging tends to ease. The difficult part, of course, here is actually not engaging in the restrictive compensatory behaviors. That can be very, very tempting. But overall, with binging, there tends to be this end point of, okay, I'm kind of getting satisfied now, that you don't have with alcohol, right? An alcoholic is not going to wake up one day and say like, oh, I'm satisfied. I've fulfilled my alcohol cravings now. A non-alcoholic may do that, but an alcoholic won't. And what I am saying, even though it is, I think it's unbelievable that some of what I'm saying is deemed controversial, right? It is actually based on science. The best study, my favorite study that is about binge eating is the Minnesota starvation study, which kind of is unintentionally about binge eating, right? If you're not familiar with the study, I have done an episode explaining the Minnesota starvation study, what it is, what happened. But essentially, here you saw they took a bunch of completely mentally and physically healthy men. They put them on an extremely restrictive diet over a period of time of a few months. And then they refed them, and they saw that the men started developing extreme hunger and binge eating in the so-called recovery phase from restriction. And what you saw is that very often this binging came with a lot of negative emotions, right? So again, these were men that did not have any qualms about body image or had any mental issues, right? They were actually chosen because they were quite, stable people, right? And even these men, they started developing a lot of guilt and shame around the fact that suddenly they were just eating everything in sight. Some even developed bulimia as a response because they got so triggered by the binging that came as a response to the restriction. But what they did see is that with the men, when they kind of just allowed them to eat their way out of it, they eventually stabilized, right? They didn't just keep binging. That's because they didn't restrict. So it did eventually stop. They did not gain weight until infinity and beyond. They tended to gain to their set point range, or like their pre-starvation weights plus an average of 10%. But this is different, how much people may gain over their pre-eating disorder weights. I made an episode about set point overshoot, so check those out. I just really wonder why we, and I say we as in therapists or coaches, or people working in the mental health sector, people working with people with eating disorders, keep giving advice that don't work, right? I don't do that, but in general, when a person comes to a therapist and they say, hey, I'm an emotional eater, I'm a binge eater, very often there is very little focus on the restrictive behaviors. Instead of focusing on the fact that this is a person who's chronically dieting, instead it is straight into, okay, what triggers these binges? And thinking that if you just resolve whatever that is, then the binges will stop. But that is very rarely the case, because you can be completely mentally in a good place and be completely happy and sane. But if you're undernourished, you're going to be really goddamn hungry. That it doesn't need to be pathologized. And I think sometimes people spend a lot of time digging when maybe it's a bit of an Occam's razor situation, right? Where maybe the simplest solution, simplest answer is the one, right? Maybe this person is hungry because they need food. One thing I see with binging is that it happens also to people who don't necessarily have any underlying sad thing going on with them, right? Then again, we all have stressors in life, right? So I think saying things as, oh, I'm a chronic binge eater because of stress at work. Yeah, but a lot of people have stress at work, but not everyone finds it rewarding to stuff their face that way, right? So why is that rewarding to you? Is it because there is an underlying undernourishment? Is it because you still have all of these psychological rules about what to eat, when to eat, that put food on a pedestal and creates a Last Supper mentality around foods? Where you tell yourself, oh, damn, I have cookies in the cupboard. I need to finish them so they don't tempt me tomorrow, right? You're essentially signalizing to your body and brain that when certain foods are available, you need to eat them ASAP because they're not going to be available for long. If the solution to binging was just have some better self-control, just don't do it, people wouldn't have been binging. And it's so unfortunate because I see this a lot, especially in bulimia recovery spaces, where there is a narrative of, okay, hide your binge foods, right? Don't have binge foods around you and just focus on eating eating non-binge foods, right? And I understand this may feel like it works for some period of time, but a lot of time people can just essentially go from bulimia to orthorexia, right? Or like go from bulimia to still spending their lives being extremely restrictive to prevent these big bad binges, when actually maybe the solution was to just be a bit like, oh, screw it. Okay, I'm going to increase my intake. Yeah, there will be times where I binge, but that is actually okay. Yeah, I binge, and, I can choose to not engage in restrictive compensatory behaviors in response. I can choose to wake up the next morning after a binge and still have my breakfast, even though I may not feel like it. And by doing this, I see over and over that people's binges start reducing, right? Because essentially you're signalizing to your body that food is still available. Food is available in excess whenever you want to, and all sorts of food are available. Because another trap is that people may re-nourish themselves, but they re-nourish themselves only on so-called safe foods, right? They don't eat anything that they really crave or the foods that they kind of fear, right? So yeah, you may physically re-nourish yourself on bread and chicken and broccoli and rice and avocado and all of that. But if you really, really crave cake, then you're going to also need to implement that, right? So there is a physical and a mental part here that is very important to understand. And the other also applies, right? You may allow yourself to eat all the cake and all the sweets, but are you eating enough? Are you allowing yourself to eat these foods consistently? Or is it like a one time you allowed yourself to have a little bit of cake at a specific time in a specific amount, right? This is not really gonna break the cycle, right? I think a lot of times people want to break the cycle the other way, right? They quit the binging, and that way they will quit the purging or the restriction or the dieting or whatsoever is going on in between the binges. But how long have you tried that for? Has it worked? Because it's very rarely effective, because we're human beings, right? It is a little bit like, okay, if someone is severely sleep deprived, they should just try and stay awake longer. So to use that example, right? Imagine someone enters the therapy room. Therapy room, is that even a thing? They enter the room with their therapist in it, or Zoom call, as most of us do these days. And they say, you know what? I am tired all the time. I struggle to stay awake during the day, and I try so hard to do it, but sometimes I'm just so exhausted, especially if I had a bad day, that I just go straight to bed and I just nap. I struggle with it. Yes, you can, and I guess from a typical psychoanalytic point of view, you maybe go in and say, like, what are you hiding from here? What is this? Is this a symptom of depression? Like, what is going on here, right? But again, Occam's razor. Wouldn't it also be good to ask the person, okay, how's your sleep? Do you sleep regularly, right? When do you go to bed? When do you wake up? Just these kind of things. Is there a reason maybe why you are so exhausted? And then imagine if the person then answers, so I go to bed very late and I wake up really early and I work a very intensive job. Then you would say, oh, okay, makes sense why you're so tired. Maybe we should up your sleep, instead of watching or looking at the tiredness and the desire to go to bed during the day as just being this like hiding from the world kind of thing. And yeah, it could be that that person is more likely to give in to the sleepiness when they are, sad, when they are upset. That doesn't mean they aren't tired. So when it comes to binging, I also think impatience is a big thing, right? A lot of times I will hear people say, okay, but I have been, making sure I get consistent meals. I'm eating enough. I'm eating everything. Why do I still have these binge episodes, right? And they have been doing this for like a few weeks, and then they expect the binges to have completely resolved. That's not necessarily how it works, right? If you have been banning yourself from certain foods, restricting yourself for some time, it takes some time to signalize to your body and brain that, hey, it's safe now. But when that happens, it is absolutely priceless. Just being able to have certain foods in your kitchen without binging on them, being at your forefront of your mind, or feeling like it is some kind of test of self-control to be around them, it is just so liberating. But the truth is, to get to that point, there will have to be times where you are going to feel a bit of out of control, The pendulum is going to swing the other way a little bit for a while, right? And that is okay. The problem is the compensatory restrictive behaviors you engage in as a response to that. Are there people who are binging without there being any kind of restrictive behaviors? Yes, there is. But this is the more rare cases. We are literally evolutionary designed to respond to a period of famine with feasting. Down on a biological level, you see that, undernourishment, it sets off certain things in our body. It sets out foods searching behaviors. This is why people get more food obsessed when they're undernourished. This can manifest as an increased interest in cooking and food and nutrition. And it can also manifest as literally just binging, even though for some people the binging may come a bit later. And it may also go in different cycles and different phases. Your leptin and ghrelin levels, these are hormones that regulate your hunger, regulate body weight. They will be out of whack when you are not eating enough. And you need to correct that before you can look into, okay, what are some other potential factors for my binging, right? You need to correct the most obvious thing, which is the undernourishment or the psychological part of restraining yourself and restricting yourself from certain foods. And then you also got to give it time, give it effort, take a bit of a leap of faith, doing essentially something that feels very, very wrong, and maybe also something that induces a lot of guilt and shame. And also something that society may not understand. Like, oh wait, you're recovering from binge eating by binging? What? It can just feel so wrong. But at the end of the day, if you are undernourished, you need to correct their energetic deficit. Have regular, consistent meals that are actually giving you some energy, right? Not just these like low calorie things to fill up your stomach. Your body can tell the difference between you filling up on boiled broccoli versus filling up on a delicious creamy pasta dish, right? Fullness is about more than just volume in your stomach. It also is completely normal when, binging to binge on certain foods, right? So typically it would be foods that you normally ban yourself from, foods that are high in energy, foods that are often high in carbohydrates and fats. And again, keep an eye on what kind of foods it is you tend to binge on, right? Are these foods that so happen to be foods or from food groups that you normally ban yourself from? Typical, if someone goes on a low carb diet, right, what they will tend to crave and binge on will be high carbohydrate foods, right? Again, it just makes so much sense. Again, Occam's razor for the third time. Your body is like, hey, why are you not eating carbohydrates? I kind of want that. Can you maybe give me some? And then trigger binging because you're not listening to it. And the thing with the binging is that it is so intense. It is not necessarily this like active choice people make, right? Binging, essentially, you are dealing with a primal instinct, has kept human beings alive for thousands of years, and you think you can just outsmart it with a little bit of self-control, a little bit of mindfulness and meditation? Oh, hell no. If it was that easy, then binging or binge restrict, binge purge, these kind of eating disorders wouldn't be the most common eating disorders that people experience. And even in completely restrictive eating disorders where there is no compensatory behaviors, even in these cases, there tends to be some degree of extreme hunger in the recovery process, and sometimes also during the eating disorder, even in typically just restrictive anorexia. Of course, there are exceptions. There are some people who never experience extreme hunger, reactive hunger, binging, etc., but this is still the minority of cases. Yet, interestingly enough, the people who experience binging tend to think they are unique, that their case is somehow worse than others, different than others. I know a lot of you who listen to this podcast now are going to be like, okay, yeah, this makes so much sense. Oh my God, I'm going to send this to my friend who's binging a lot and is in this binge dieting cycle. But it doesn't apply to me because X, Y, Z, and then insert reasons. But again, try and ask yourself this question. Did the binging start during or after a period of restriction? And when I say restriction, that can also mean a so-called lifestyle change, clean eating thing, gym kick. It doesn't need to mean just hardcore starvation, right? And if that's the case, I need you to ask yourself, is that really a coincidence? It's kind of like, again, the sleep example that I used. Imagine asking that person, did this excessive daytime sleepiness, did that begin with you going to bed really late, waking up really early and having a really intensive job? And the person is like, yeah, then is that going to be a coincidence? I mean, it could be, but statistically speaking, what do you think? Is it a correlation or a causation here, right? Your eating disorder is always going to want to look for solutions where it wants to find them, right? It is like that good old expression I probably said a few times where you walk down the street and then you see a man looking for something under one of the street lights, right? And you're like, hey man, what are you looking for? And the man is like, oh, I'm looking for my wallet, right? And you're like, okay, is this where you lost it? And the man is like, no, but this is where the light is. Again, he's not going to find his wallet. He's looking for where the light is because that is the most easy place to look for it. And that's kind of where he wants to find it, right? But the wallet's not there, right? He wants it to be there, but it's not there. And we do this in so many arenas, right? We want the solution to be a certain place or a certain way. And then we know deep inside, like, oh, this is not where I'm going to find the solution. We need to go outside our comfort zone. We need to do that thing that we haven't tried yet. That is our last thing that like we want to do, but we know it is something we need to try. So if you are someone struggling with binging, I want to encourage you, try and rule out restrictive behaviors, mental and physical restriction, and then see. Worst case scenario, you rule them out and now you can go look for another solution, right? But wouldn't it be good to rule out the most obvious and common cause of binging before proceeding? Are you restricting yourself, right? And this can manifest in sneaky ways, which I will also talk more about in the future and have spoken about in past episodes about like sneaky behaviors that may creep in. It could be something like only allowing yourself certain foods that you deem good or right or quote unquote healthy. It could be excessive forms of movement, just really upping the movement to a point where you need a lot more food than you think. It could be that you're still recovering from a period of undernourishment. Maybe rules about when to eat certain foods, certain amounts, obsessive counting like you are on a budget. Again, be curious about how restrictive behaviors may manifest. Work on targeting them and then see. See what happens then. I still have not seen a case of binge eating that doesn't improve by lessening restrictive behaviors. I still haven't. I'm very curious if they exist. I would love to see, but I just still haven't seen it. And I have seen a lot of cases. And equally, I've never seen I'm seriously saying never seen a case of binging that improves with restriction. I haven't. I have seen people going from, for example, bulimia to quote unquote thinking they are recovering with orthorexia, and like going from bulimia to like this insanely rigid diet, or essentially just going from bulimia to anorexia as well, right? We talk a lot about going from anorexia to bulimia, but the other way can happen as well. But that is not recovery. That's just one eating disorder and then swapping it with another eating disorder. And even in these cases, the extreme hunger, the binging tends to come back after a certain amount of time. And I find it kind of alarming when I hear people in my field who work with eating disorders who are advocating for more restrictive behaviors with people who are already struggling with restrictive behaviors. Like, oh yeah, let's add in a bit more restraint, a bit restriction, a bit like, because it implies that the binging is this big bad wolf and just adds more shame, because we know that the inevitable is that you are going to binge again, right? If you are still engaging in these restrictive behaviors, right? And that implies that you're doing something wrong, that you're failing. And that shame can very easily trigger purging or compensatory restrictive behaviors in response, right? So I don't really think it is a helpful approach. I think instead a more helpful approach would be like, oh, okay, it happens, right? Binges happen. And if anything, in recovery, if you're someone who's undernourished, it may actually be part of the healing. Again, this is an evolutionary thing. Think about it. When as humans, we were living in tribes, right? And of course, I know some societies still do, but I think back in the days, let's say thousands of years ago, we were living in these tribes and there would have been a period of famine and then suddenly food is available, right? It would be kind of weird if we just ate like a tiny bit. No, we would have a feast to compensate for the fact that we had been in a serious energetic deficit, right? In the same way, if you don't sleep enough and just run on like a few hours of sleep for 3 days, then on the fourth night, when you allow yourself to actually sleep, you're going to sleep probably a bit longer. Or if you're dehydrating yourself all day and you get access to a bottle of water, you're probably going to chug that bottle of water pretty quick. Doesn't mean you're an emotional drinker. Doesn't mean that you're addicted to water and need to like limit your intake and stay away and restrict the amounts you get during the day. If anything, that's just going to make it worse. And that is what happened after literally just a few hours of dehydration, right? And then think, how long have you been engaging in restrictive behaviors for? How big of an energetic deficit may you have created over this period of time? And I think we as a recovery community as well should be a little bit mindful of how we talk about binging. Completely pathologizing it and being like, oh yeah, that is exclusively something bad and awful is maybe not helpful for people going through it. Instead, seeing it as a natural part of recovering from undernourishment, recovering from chronic yo-yo dieting, disordered eating, eating disorders may actually be a bit more of a helpful approach. And even though no one owes anyone their story and nobody owes anyone sharing details about their recovery that they are not comfortable with, I still see a lot of people in recovery spaces who will talk about everything except the binges, right? I'll even talk to many people who say that they talk with their therapist about everything, but they leave out the binging part because it is so shameful. But it literally isn't. It's literally just your body doing what it's been programmed to do. Or your mind responding to restrictions, right? Your mind responding to, okay, you can't have this. Okay, well, I'm going to want it more now. It's almost like a little child, have a lot of toys, take one of the toy, put it up on a shelf and say, you can't play with that. Then suddenly that child is going to be really obsessed about that one toy up on the shelf. Forbidden fruits taste the sweetest, you know? Anyways, guys, I probably will make a part 2 of this where I talk a bit more about binging because there are a few things that I would also like to cover that I haven't already. But now I'm going to take a listener question before this episode gets too long. This listener question is from Instagram, and I have probably said it before, but I'll say it again. I tend to take listener questions on my Instagram at Amalia Lee or at letsrecover.co.uk in the stories where I open a ask box where people can ask listener questions. So here the person is asking about what to do when you are waking up hungry during the night. So this is very, very common in recovery, that especially when someone is going through extreme hunger, but just usually in recovery anyways, right? Waking up at night and being quite hungry. And the answer is pretty simple. You need to eat. I know your eating disorder is gonna try and talk you out of it and be like, oh yeah, but do I really? It's in the middle of the night, I'm so comfy in bed, blah, blah, blah. I know your eating disorder is gonna try and talk you out of it, right? But it is still important that you get the food in. What I would recommend, and what I tend to say when clients are going through night hunger, is actually, I tend to recommend that they have like on their nightstand to have a few easily available snacks that they can leave out overnight. So maybe have some like chocolate bars or a bag of nuts or something easy and quick that you can just grab at night. And if you don't want to get out of bed and make yourself like a 5-course meal, even though you can of course do that. A lot of times people are scared of engaging with their nighttime hunger because they're scared it's going to become a habit or that it's somehow wrong. And then they're thinking, oh yeah, but quote unquote normal people don't do this. So first of all, I mean, sometimes we do. Like, I'm recovered. I will have times where I wake up really hungry at night and I just grab something. But it doesn't really happen as often now as it did in recovery. The reason why it's important to actually just get some food when you wake up hungry at night is, first of all, you want to avoid all forms of restrictive behaviors, as I've kind of spoken about in this episode in general. So mental or physical hunger, you got to give into it, even if it is at an inconvenient time. And I do understand there are times where you literally just can't give into it, like you're in the middle of a meeting or something, right? I understand that, but at night it is technically possible. So make it easy for yourself by having some snack easily available. Equally, you will also find that you will tend to sleep a lot better when you're full. And yeah, I do understand that with eating disorders and recovery, this may not also always feel relatable, right? Because you may be very anxious or stressed or have some discomfort, physical or mental. But overall, we tend to sleep better when we have eaten compared to on an empty stomach. Our sleep tend to be better. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep, I tend to go have a bowl of cereal, and I feel like it always just puts me straight back into sleep. Overall, your eating disorder may not want you to give in to night hunger, and that is also part why it's so important to do it, because recovery is essentially about doing the opposite actions, repeat. So enjoy those night snack, even if it is literally in the middle of the night. You can make it easy for yourself by having it easily available, but equally it's completely fine if you have a specific craving and want to go to the kitchen. It's not going to last forever. You're not going to have that sleep pattern for the rest of your life. It's a normal part of recovery and it will improve with time. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode about binging. I will make another episode about it, part 2 essentially, where I cover some more bits, including how to deal with the discomfort and guilt. And the bonus episode about the group coaching program that I'm offering will also be out. And equally, you can check out letsrecover.co.uk for more information on that, or drop me an email if you have any questions. I will also add that unfortunately I cannot answer one-on-one specific recovery questions over email. So when I say email, I mean more if you have specific questions about the group coaching program, right? Okay, guys, have an amazing day and week, and I will see you guys next week.